We have been looking at Christian evidences for the last several weeks. And for the last several weeks, as we began this study, we've been looking at the philosophical arguments for God. When you start looking at Christian evidences or apologetics, there are a couple of different areas, as we mentioned, that are included with this. And you can go a lot of different directions with, showing the existence for God. Of course, atheists really, they have their own ideas of why someone might, not believe in God or try to disprove God, and they try to use these different methods or these different arguments in different fields of what they know. And so we want to take a look and try to hit these different areas so that when we do come in contact with one, we study with one, that we are able to show as much as we possibly can. Our job is not to try to win an argument, but to try to plant that seed and get them understanding. You're never going to reach an atheist, likely, in just one or two sittings. It's going to be a process. They've probably believed this for a while. There have been atheists that have believed in God, and they fell away from God, and they've fallen into this, into atheism or agnosticism and so forth. And so it really helps to understand where they come from and listen and get to know who they are and why they might believe what they believe, and then start this conversation and just present these different things. But we've been looking at all these different philosophical things the last couple of weeks because it is a major area that atheists have been hitting, especially with college campuses and high schools. They've really been spreading a lot of material to different people publicly and privately, and getting on the internet and going on YouTube and doing a whole bunch of different programs where they try to discredit the Christian or the Christian faith. And so, hopefully it has been of some help. After tonight, starting next week, excuse me, we're going to shift gears and move from the philosophical arguments to looking at the scientific. And that's probably the one that you're more familiar with, or that you have been more familiar with in the past. We hear a lot of scientific arguments for the case for God. Excuse me. And so there's a number of different areas when you start looking at the design of the universe and what it entails, and looking at the science of who we are and what is on this earth and why it does what it does. And so we're going to be looking at for the first little bit of the scientific part of it, we'll be looking at design and what makes sense. We'll be looking at some of the textbooks and what they say and why they really don't make sense. A lot of, a lot of high school students, middle school students, even elementary students with their science books, they allow a lot of things today they never used to allow. And then we're going to look at the global flood and the evidence behind the global flood. There's a lot of skepticism and higher criticism of this flood. A lot of people say that it was just a localized flood, or that it could not have happened the way it happened. And of course, you hear arguments from these day-age theorists that believe that things like the Grand Canyon show the global flood couldn't have happened because it took millions and millions and millions of years for that. And but there is a lot of evidence about how the Grand Canyon was formed, that it could not have been taken as long as they say it did, that it had to be one big massive push, a major push of something that happened catastrophically. And so things like that are really a neat thing to see, and along with all the other evidences that we have scientifically that we'll be looking at as well. Looking at dinosaurs, whether or not humans and dinosaurs existed together. That's a hot topic, especially among kids. Adults love it. I love studying dinosaurs and things like that, and going to these queries of, Tonight, though, I want to finish this philosophical argument up for the existence of God with one of the greatest apologists that we have ever seen and probably have ever read. We're going to look at Ecclesiastes, or some of the Ecclesiastes tonight. How many of you have studied Ecclesiastes or have gone through a class with it? Okay. How extensively have you seen it? We're not going to go through a whole Ecclesiastes study, but there are things that are in this writing that Solomon put together that make him one of the greatest apologists that have ever lived. And we're going to look at that tonight. We always tend to go outside the Bible to try to prove the Bible or prove the existence of God, when there are people within that really make great cases for the existence of God, and Solomon is one of them. And when we look at the philosophical arguments for him, Solomon does a great deal of reasoning in this work to show the existence of God. He's and remember, Solomon is known to be the wisest man of all time. And in this wisdom, he wanted to know about man. Why is man here? What's so great about him, or what's so important? And really a lot of things that people really think deeply about even today. And Solomon did the same thing. But Solomon, in his wisdom, comes up with this idea of reasoning that many have asked even today. And this is the argument for desire as part of it. We looked at worship last week and how man has the innate desire to worship. And that, because we have that innate desire to worship something or someone, then there must be a God, because we can't, it's illogical to try to come up with someone who's greater than ourselves, unless there is something greater than ourselves. Because we're all we know that we see every day. And to come up with something that's, that can realistically be a greater thinker or more powerful or all-knowing, the only way to do that is really to understand that there must be something, because we are limited, and we know that there can be things that are unlimited. And Solomon takes this even further as he writes the Ecclesiastes. But there comes a time when we ask, is there more? Have you ever asked that? Ever wondered that? Is there more than just, what we have? Children will ask that. There has to be something more. I remember when I was younger, and we'd have sleepover at each other's houses. I remember laying out on a trampoline with a friend of mine, and we were just looking up at everything, and we started getting into this discussion. Of course, we were younger and didn't know a whole lot, but we thought, but you do notice the stars, and you do notice how far that really extends. And then you start talking about, I wonder what's out there. I wonder what, is there another planet? Is there other, are there other solar systems? Of course, NASA has found other solar systems. They just have never found another planet that's inhabitable like the Earth is. How interesting is that? Of all the technology that NASA has, and as far as advanced as it is, as sophisticated as it is, there's not another place like the Earth. There's not another place where beings are on here that, now people really, these UFO enthusiasts, they have all these conferences, and they believe, there's life out there, and really get hung up on a lot of these different things. But realistically, there hasn't been anything like that for a reason. And, but you still wonder just how far it goes. How many stars are really out there? NASA has been able to count a great deal. The Hubble telescope really helped them out in discovering a lot of these and discovering other solar systems. But then you start to realize how small we are and think, wow, is there really more to this? Is there more to me? Is there more to this, to this world, or to this life, to us being here? Is there more to what we think, and so forth? And that is what really kind of the premise is for Solomon writing, because he asked the same question. And then he started thinking about it and started reasoning it. And if you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, I think I have it up there, in verse 12, listen to how he starts this out. In verse 12, he says, I, the preacher, and so he refers to himself as a preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my heart, look at this right here, to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. So he sets out, and he's wondering about all these different things that are going on down here, wondering the same thing. Is there something more to all of this? And he says, this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man by which they may be exercised. And so, he's contemplating all of this down here. Don't overlook stuff like this. And he's recognizing, that God has set the burden on man, the sons of man, which is a reference to who we are, or to anyone, the pagans, because he was certainly surrounded by idolatry, wasn't he? But he said, God has given to the sons of man by which they may be exercised this burdensome task. And I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. And indeed, all is what? What is it? What's the word he uses? All is vanity. And grasping for what? The wind. So he says this is, God has placed his burden. He's given this task to man in which they may be exercised, and so he's recognizing how God places this in us. He places it on man to figure things out, to listen, to see, to watch, and to reason, and so forth. And he says, I've looked at everything that's under the sun. In other words, he says, I've looked at all the immediate things going on. He's not, he's saying, he's not looking beyond that. He's looking at everything natural, everything that is inhabited under the sun, everything around him. And he says, all of this down here, it's vanity. And it's temporal. He says all is vanity and grasping for the wind. People are wanting to know. That people are grabbing whatever reasoning they possibly can. How interesting that was, that someone like Solomon would look at this life and understand that what God has given to us, and then he says, everything under the sun is vanity. Everything under the sun, people are just grabbing. They're trying to make sense of what this world is, wondering the same thing that we wonder about today. And so he says this wisdom, or he says seeking wisdom, increasing knowledge, enjoying pleasure, and you see this throughout the Ecclesiastes when you read it. Establishing a legacy through work. He talks about people working, people having pleasure, people having all of these different experiences. A legacy through work and relationships. He talks about relationships, everything. All of these things fail to satisfy our hearts. They're temporal. And as he starts to talk about in his writings, everything's going to pass away. And so he's saying, well, then what's going on? Why is, everything under the sun is vanity? It's just, they're grasping. What does this all mean? And why is all of this stuff that we understand, that we see immediately, it's just all temporal? Then what's the significance of it? And what's the point? What is it teaching us? What are we supposed to know that God has given to man? And then you start to understand as he goes on that there's only one thing that is going to satisfy man's longing for something. This is one of the greatest arguments, I think, that you could ever make for the existence of God from the philosophical part of it, to reason for it. You hear, you see at the very end of this, Ecclesiastes, turn over to chapter 12 and verse 13. Very end of this writing, and we've probably heard this, at least this part of Ecclesiastes, if you've heard nothing else. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. This is the conclusion. So he's talking about all these different things. We're going to backtrack a little bit after this and look at more of these writings that led him up to this conclusion. But this is everything that he's reasoned leads him up to this. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. To what? To fear God. So he says there has to be a God to fear, right? To fear God and to what? What else? To keep his commandments. That's the conclusion of the whole matter. For this is man's all. This is everything that we know. That's the only conclusion that we could come up with, is that there's God and we fear him, and to keep God's commandments because God is greater, obviously, than who we are. Atheists, you think about this. Atheists spend their entire life wondering about the universe, don't they? You ever listen to an atheist? How many in here have ever, I know you've talked about atheists because I asked you a couple weeks ago. How many in here have ever seen an atheist, like a renowned atheist, talk, whether it's in a conference or in a news, front of people, and give their speech or presentation of why they think that, there can't be a God? Atheists are obsessed with finding out about the universe. They want to find out about it. They don't not care about the universe. I think that's, sometimes a kind of a shortfall we have. We think, well, atheists just don't care. They don't, they're just looking at the short-sighted part of, oh no, atheists love the universe. They're fascinated by what lies beyond. They just can't explain what it is. And that's that's where their shortcoming comes into play. But they spend their entire life wondering about the universe, wondering about man's place in it, and having absolutely nothing to show or to satisfy that desire. And because they don't have anything to show, they're unhappy. They're frustrated because they want to know. I want to show you a couple of quotes from some renowned atheists, and then we'll get back to Ecclesiastes. Stephen Hawking, how many know who he is? Probably most of us, if not all of us, know who Stephen Hawking is. Famed atheist. He died not too long ago. But listen to this. My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all. Stephen Hawking spent his life trying to refute God, Christians, trying to come up with case after case after case against why God does not exist, or why he cannot exist, and why there can't be anything afterwards. He said a couple of times that because he can't believe that God exists, or that he can't believe there's a Satan that exists, then there cannot be a heaven or a hell. But then you see this, and he says, but I want to know all about the universe. He was fascinated by it. And if you've ever read any of or listened to Stephen Hawking, he was really interested in why the universe, what made the universe tick. He didn't believe that there was a God that made it tick. He just believed that everything came about by chance and accidentally, or just randomly, and that there was no creator. It's always been. But then he turns around and he's like, I want to know all about it. And he said this because he had no idea what made the universe, and it perplexed him, because he knew that he was very limited in man's understanding. Even the telescopes that can go to the farthest reaches of what we think we see, or what we can see, and what we think we understand, he still said, well, there's even something beyond that. He just could not, he couldn't fathom it. And it's why it's frustrating to atheists, because they're trying to gain all this knowledge and all these different facts and get this information, and they have nothing to explain it. And it's perplexing. Carl Sagan was another renowned atheist. Said, I believe our future depends powerfully on how well we understand this cosmos in which we float like a mote of dust in the morning sky. I believe our future depends on how well we know. He was fascinated on finding out about the universe. Said that our future depends on it. And yet, he had no idea. He had no more of an explanation than any other atheist did. And of course, they're not going to reason God. You can't bring the Bible into it because they don't believe in the Bible. You can't bring God into it because they don't believe in God. And so here they are trying to explain, and they come up short, and they're frustrated and angry, and here, someone comes along that says, have you ever given this a thought? That maybe there is a designer. I saw another quote. I didn't put it up there. I guess I should have. Talking about, it was from Stephen Hawking, saying that I don't believe in God. I don't believe that the universe ever had a creator. And then he mentions, he says, we'll never know about the design of the universe, or I want to know about the design of the universe, which was really interesting. It's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? First he says there's no God. All of a sudden he turns around and he mentions a design of the universe. But if there is a design of something, what must there be? A designer. It's logical. You can't have a design without a designer. Things don't just pop up from nowhere. You can't make something of nothing. If there's a design, there has to be a design. And he acknowledged that. but he just couldn't explain it. And so we have all these, we have these different atheists saying things like this, and they keep coming up short. Why? Solomon starts to reason this, and he, and in his writings, he doesn't talk about people who don't believe it, but his writings completely annihilate the atheistic thinking. The thing we want, as Solomon is pointing out in his writings, the thing we want most is God. That's what he said. He placed this longing in our hearts. He placed the longing in our hearts to want something more than who we are. And it's logical to think that there's something beyond this. That that this is not it. This life is not it. I think I mentioned on Larry King there was an interview he did with Stan Lee from the Marvel comics, and Stan Lee was an atheist. I didn't know that until I saw the interview, but he asked him, "Do you believe in life after?" Larry King asked him, "Do you believe in life after death? Do you believe in God?" And Stan said, "I don't believe in life after death. Don't believe there's a God." But he said, "Here's what perplexes me: is trying to fathom nothingness forever." And he just couldn't wrap his mind around it. And when you start looking at that, you can almost, if you take him a little bit further, could probably start pushing him into the arena of saying, well, maybe there has to be something in that nothingness. Something's going to inhabit it. Otherwise, it'll just be nothing, and all this happened. So boom, we happen. All of a sudden, boom, we don't happen, and there's never going to be anything else. Why? The thing we want is God. We are reasoning. We can think about it. God, about this God, and He placed this longing in our hearts for Him. Look at chapter 3. Chapter 3 and verse 10 of Ecclesiastes, he writes, "I have seen," look at this right here, "the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied." So here he says it again. He said it back in chapter 1 that God put this burden on the sons of man. Here he is in chapter 3 again. And he says, "I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied." And look what he says right here. "He has made everything beautiful in its time, and also He has put" what? He has put eternity in their hearts. God did this. Man has this, he understood back then that man was reasoning, and he saw man around him trying to reason what's going on with eternity. And because because there's eternity, and they could reason, or they could start asking or wondering about eternity, thinking about eternity, even if they couldn't comprehend it. None of us can comprehend eternity. We just, we barely get through this week, right? We have our calendars, and we write down all of our, everything that we're doing throughout the year or the month or whatever the case might be, and we're just waiting for that day to hit. You ever notice that? You ever look at, we look at our watches, don't we? If we can wear one, I can't wear a watch, but why do you look at your watch? Do you look at it just to say, well, I wonder what time it is? Why do we look at our watch? Sunday morning, you look at your watch or the clock on the wall. Why are you looking at it? To be on time. You're wondering, well, how much time do I have before I have to be where I'm supposed to be, right? That's why we look at our watch. We're looking at, okay, how much time, we look at it, okay, it's 11 o'clock. Is it time to eat yet? We look at time as most of the time why we look at it is just we're looking at what that next thing to do is, or where we have to be, or how much time we have left before we're supposed to be doing something, because everything is on a schedule for us. And even if we don't write it down. But then you start writing it down and you say, okay, well, I've got 3 weeks left till this, or 1 month left until this. I've got this vacation coming up, or this doctor's appointment coming up. Or we've got, worship coming up, and I know that 9:45, I'm going to be in Bible class on Sunday morning. 7 o'clock on Wednesday, I'm going to be at the building. And we look at that and say, okay, well, how much time do I have left? How much time is it going to take me to get there? And we start just thinking about these things, right? That's what our timeline is. Because we can't comprehend eternity. Because eternity, none of that matters. And here, Solomon is talking about the people around him, saying that God has put eternity in their hearts. They're trying to reason it. And the very idea that they can even reason eternity, or that they're trying to reason, shows that it has to be there. They can't wonder. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this. Augustine said, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they can find rest in you." In other words, the only thing that's going to satisfy what I wonder about eternity, about the ultimate rest, has to be in God, because we don't find it down here. I'm going to go on with it. I'm going to make this even more specific. A man named Blaise Pascal, a mathematician, philosopher. I know it's going to be hard to see that, so I'll read it. If you can, so you can follow along. Listen to what he says right here. All men seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. The cause of some going to war and of others avoiding it is the same desire in both, attended with different views. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the motive of every action of every man, even of those who hang themselves. And yet after such a great number of years, no one without faith has reached the point to which all continually look. All complain, princes and subjects, noblemen and commoners, old and young, strong and weak, learned and ignorant, healthy and sick, of all countries, all time, all ages, and all conditions. A trial so long, so continuous, and so uniform should certainly convince us of our inability to reach the good by our own efforts. What is it then that this desire and this inability proclaim to us, but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which there now remains to him only the mark and empty trace which he in vain tries to fill from all his surroundings, seeking from things absent the help he does not obtain in things present. But these are all inadequate, because the infinite abyss can only be filled by an infinite and immutable object, that is to say, only by God himself. I'll simplify this. He's saying everything down here that we see, all the desires that we have down here can be fulfilled down here. Have you noticed that? All of the desires that we have down here, but the objects, the desires that we have beyond this, wondering what goes beyond this earth, what goes beyond this life, beyond this world. The very fact that people wonder that, even the atheists, they won't admit, because they don't want to call it God. But the very fact that we wonder about what is beyond this life, wondering about what's supernatural or into the eternity, shows that something has to be in that eternities. God placed eternities in our heart. I'll show you another quote. C.S. Lewis. How many know who C.S. Lewis is? Most of us probably do. Author of the Chronicles of Narnia, Mere Christianity. Listen to what he writes in Mere Christianity. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for these desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. That's exactly what Solomon was arguing years and years and years before that, but C.S. Lewis picked up on it, and he writes about something very similar. Think about that. Solomon's argument is, I have tried everything, and nothing satisfies this longing. I look, everything under the sun, everything that's under here is vanity. Everything under here, is just grasping for air. Everything under here, why? Because it's temporal. Because what I'm grasping for can't be explained in this world. Wondering what's outside of this world, wondering what's beyond this life, because not even an atheist, he thinks he knows. He's pretty confident he knows. He doesn't have to believe anything. What he believes is irrelevant, but he still wonders, well, what happens? He can be convinced, okay, well, I guess nothing happens. Does he really know? And what evidence does he have until he gets to it? Every person wonders about that. The very fact that the atheist is wondering about worlds beyond this one, the universe, shows that something is greater than what we are, because we definitely didn't create the universe. The only logical thing is God. Understanding it. If I have I have natural desires, so do you. What happens when you're hungry? You get that, you get that craving, you're hungry in the afternoon, or you're hungry late at night. How do you satisfy it? You eat. We can logically say that, can't we? I'm hungry, it stands to reason, I'm going to eat something I can satisfy that immediate desire. What happens when you get thirsty? Give me a drink, right? What happens when you get tired and sleepy? Well, I know that, I'm going to go into my bed, right? Or find a couch, fall asleep watching a game or TV or whatever the case might be. Or in the afternoon when, you can fall asleep anywhere if we're tired, can't we? That's just, it just makes sense. We have a craving in this life, we fulfill it with whatever it is. And there's immediate things that we can fulfill it with. All natural desires, though, such as knowledge or beauty or losing weight, or whatever the case might be, can be satisfied and fulfilled in this world. I know if I'm not happy with the way I look, there are things I can do to change that. Whether it's exercise, whether it's eating differently, whether it's medical procedure, doesn't matter, somehow, some way, I can go somewhere and make myself smaller. Even if it's going to cost money, I can make myself smaller. I have the means in this world to take care of that, can I? And that goes for anything. And so all of these natural desires can find their fulfillment in this world. However, when all of these desires are met, there's still something that is unsatisfied, that can't satisfy me in this world. It's a desire to be loved more deeply. I can't satisfy that myself, can I? I can't explain that. To be loved more deeply doesn't come from just something from this world. Love comes from somewhere, but that's a feeling. I can't open my refrigerator and get love and be loved more deeply. I can't turn on the TV and get more love. That comes from something far deeper than any instantaneous gratification that I can get. We're unsatisfied. We want to be understood more intimately, don't we? I want to be known. I want my wife to know me as deeply as she possibly can. And she wants the same. And we want the same for our friends, to know us. And that's why we have friends, don't we? They know us. I can't just go down to Walmart and pick up a friend that is going to love me or depend on me, right? But we just don't do that, do we? There are things that are beyond what this life can provide. The way we feel about each other. We want to be comforted more perfectly. We feel things. It has to do with emotion. That someone can do something to make me feel secure and safe. You can't just get that. We want deeper joy. We want to be happy, don't we? No one lives their life that I've ever met and said, you know what? I wish I was as miserable as they could be. I sometimes wonder if the only reason people are happy sometimes is when they're mad, but that's just not the case. We want to be happy. We don't like to be miserable. We don't like to be in bad moods. We seek that deeper joy. Where does that come from? That's not something that we find that is, that can be immediately fulfilled in this life. Something is providing that. And that something is beyond this world. Someone put that in us. You don't just have it. All of this talk about these atheists, that, we're this bunch of particles, and we came from this, amoeba, we came from this cell, and it multiplied into different cells, and then it became something, and then that something became something different, and then that kind became something different over millions and millions and millions of years, and it all started from just some little cell. But that doesn't explain the desire that we have with everything we just talked about. That's illogical to think that, because there's absolutely no reasoning behind some cell that has absolutely no thought or reason or desire or anything to it. And so all of these different things that we look at, if natural desires can be satisfied, hunger and thirst and all these different things, then what about what can't be by all these things? There has to be something. If these desires cannot be satisfied in an object of this world, then there must be some object outside of this world that does satisfy that, because we know we have it. Where does it come from? What makes me satisfied with the person that I'm with? What makes me feel finally that I have felt, that I feel the love that I have been longing for my whole life? What makes me satisfied with, that joy, or just having that peace, or that feeling safe with someone, and just, this, and we can't explain it with us, can we? It doesn't come from us. Isn't that interesting? Even an atheist will love their family. Even an atheist wants that joy with his kids. Well, that joy has to come from somewhere. And the object that provides all of this, since it can't be something natural that we have, has to be God. This thing called God. This being who is all powerful and all knowing. And that Solomon says he puts the eternities in our hearts. An all knowing, all loving, all powerful, personal God in heaven. And if it's not God, then what is it? Where does it come from? They can't explain it. Never have been able to do it. Some of them haven't tried. Some of them are honest and say, we just don't know. Of course they don't, because they're not going to accept what's greater than they are. Why would we have this desire if it had no fulfillment when all natural desires do? God satisfies the deepest emotions and feelings and needs of our hearts. That's what Solomon drove home with the Ecclesiastes. When you start looking at what he, how he reasoned and what he provided with, with how God designed us and what God put in us, it's not just a bunch of flesh. It's not just God taking, the dirt of the earth or the dust of the earth and molding him into some fleshly thing that's just not, it's just a puppet. We exist and we feel and we see each other and we become friends with one another and we're attracted to personalities. And what makes two people come together, say, wow, we've got this in common. We have the same interests. Imagine that. Or, we just don't see eye to eye on everything, but we can still get along. What makes a man and a woman attracted to each other? I mean, we are attracted to each other, right? What makes that attraction? That comes from somewhere, and it's not anything that something natural can immediately fulfill. That's how we know there has to be God. Solomon was the greatest apologist, I think, that ever reasoned him. And he didn't even do it scientifically. People love the science part of the Bible. They love the science of, showing what it can't. But when you start looking at just, it goes way beyond science with why we're so special and why God designed us this way and why he put the eternities in us and why he put these emotions in us and why he put these desires in us. I mean, you start to think of how you operate. And then we're going to take this, everything that we have. There's a reason. When we leave this life, these fleshly things that the atheist thinks that's all there is to us, this is going to be gone. Why? Because this flesh, this isn't even who we are. We're in this vessel. We make it work, don't we? But we have a soul, we have a spirit, and we haven't even gotten to the arguments for the soul. I may mention that a little bit next week before we get into the scientific part of it. But we have what God has put inside these bodies. And when these bodies are gone, what's going to happen? Consciousness, we still have the consciousness. We still have happiness. We still have joy. And all we are is just we move on from this world to over there. And now we're with all the other ones who left their bodies behind. And they're over there. And they're conscious and talking. And how amazing that is when we start looking at how God designed and planned everything. That's all the time we have for tonight. Next week we'll get into the more of the scientific part of Christian evidence. Appreciate your attention tonight.